Hey everyone, welcome to the College Football Rundown. I'm Woj.
I'm Walt.
A lot of things to cover this week. I had a bunch of close games last week that I want to go over. A couple really good games coming up this week. A lot of people are on bye, but there are still quite a few marquee games, one in particular. Little controversy with the number one spot as well, with Mississippi State and Florida State. Florida State now dropping to 2 and putting Mississippi State above.
We're going to get in that for sure. I can tell you that this episode.
Talk a little bit about Kyle's vacation coming up this weekend.
I don't know why you'd call it a vacation. I will be having a lot of fun, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a vacation.
We'll talk about some fantasy football. You know, everybody's got their rosters tightening up this time of the year. We're about halfway through the season, so everybody's trying to see those consistent players and make their last push for their playoff spots in their leagues. We'll talk a little bit about fantasy coming up this week and a couple players that you might want to have in your roster, or if you're just looking to fill in some of those bye slots. There's a lot of buys going around this week, so it might be a good week to swap in and out, or maybe use that waiver wire for next week.
Yeah, definitely. We're both in that situation this week in our league too.
Yeah. All right, everybody. First off, a couple of those close games from last week, one being the Arkansas-Bama game. Bama traveled to Arkansas, played the Razorbacks at their turf. A couple key things in that game was second quarter, Bama scored a touchdown. Or not Bama, excuse me. Arkansas scored a touchdown and missed the extra. Well, it got blocked. The extra point got blocked. Ended up being huge because the end score of the game was Bama 14, Arkansas 13. So you don't see it every day. I guess it was impressive for Alabama to score that touchdown, block that field goal, but props to them. You don't see it all that often. Arkansas has struggled so far this year in these close games. This game they had a couple missed opportunities. They fumbled the ball on the goal line, which would have gave them another touchdown. They had another fumble when they were driving down the field. And then Brandon Allen at the end of the game there threw across his body across field and ended up throwing the pick while they were driving down in the last couple minutes of the game to try to get him in the field goal range. Bielema almost was in tears at the end of the game talking about it because he felt so bad for the kids and he can't produce a win for them. They get so close in these games. You remember the Texas A&M game, they had two giant plays, both that got called back by penalties. I think it was a 54-yard and a 74-yard, both on touchdowns. One was a tripping, one was a holding. Both got called back, and they ended up losing that game by a very small margin. So, I kind of feel bad for Arkansas. They're not a bad team. They've been playing all the big dogs good. They just can't get a win in the SEC.
Yeah, that's true. And again, Brett Bielema being Arkansas's head coach, as you mentioned before, obviously, I don't know if our fans know that, but They have had a rough time with that, and again, they just lost to a real good Alabama team, though. That's a good team. Again, they're maybe not top 4 for the playoff selection, but Alabama is a good team.
Yeah, definitely.
Besides that game, kind of along the same lines too of crazy endings. USC Arizona. I don't know who stayed up to watch this game because I don't know what time it was late when this game ended, but it was worth it if you stayed up to watch it.
Yeah, it was an awesome game. Watching Arizona is just a fun team. We're a fun game, so.
Definitely. The end of the score was 28-26. USC ended up taking Arizona down. Arizona scored with 3:27 left to get the game a little closer. They kicked the onside kick and recovered it. They drove down the field. Game-winning field goal, would have been a game-winning field goal. Casey Skoron missed a 36-yard field goal to lose the game for Arizona. That had to really hurt after getting that onside kick. Obviously, the touchdown right before. I mean, that game was exciting. Javarius Allen had a good game that game for USC, the running back, 205 yards and 3 touchdowns, but still, the end of the game, just crazy. Rich Rod, you can't fault him for putting his kicker in, even though he was only 2 for 5 on the night, because they really had no other choice other than to kick that, because obviously you're not going to get a 25-yard touchdown pass as likely as you're going to get a field goal from 36. So yeah. I don't fault Rich Rod for that. Some people have been saying that he made the wrong decision because the kicker wasn't doing well, but nonetheless, that was a great game.
Yeah, it definitely helps that South Division a little bit, too. Get a little bit more diversity. Arizona was unbeaten in the conference going into that. They get their loss to USC, who now takes the lead in that South Division in the Pac-12. And, the Pac-12 is literally up for runnings at this point in time. So you have so many good teams with one loss in the record. So again, no unbeatens in the Pac-12. So
yeah, well, if we're going to keep in the Pac-12, we can talk about that Oregon UCLA game. Oregon won 42-30. Mariota ran for 2 touchdowns and passed for 210 yards. He was getting, last week we talked about how his protection wasn't coming up good for him. Last game he got a couple guys back off of injury, and the line was actually doing pretty well. They kept him free for the most part. Anyways.
Yeah, no redshirt freshman anymore in the line. That's definitely got to help.
That does help, and it helps your running back too. Royce Freeman was their key guy that game. He had 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, that was an exciting game to watch. There was a lot of offense back to Oregon style. And again, they did win the game 42-30 over a pretty good UCLA team, who we've talked about a couple times this year.
Yeah.
So that game was exciting. And then you can move over to the Big 12, Texas, Oklahoma. Who would have thought Texas would do as well as they did against Oklahoma?
Yeah, Oklahoma's been slipping. They were one of those teams that had the easiest schedule coming into the college football this year, and they're falling apart at the seams.
Oh yeah, if it weren't for their special teams, they would have been out of that game early. But their special teams obviously had a couple touchdowns, and they kept in with Texas long enough to take the lead at the end and then hold that lead. But Texas played them well. I think they were in the first half. They were double their yards on passing offense and rushing offense. So.
Yeah, that's surprising for a Texas team whose offense hasn't been the greatest this year. Their defense has definitely held them in games. So.
Yeah. Well, and also in the Big 12, we watched this game together. At the end of it, anyways, TCU Baylor. Mm-hmm. Was that not an exciting game?
Well, I guess if you don't like watching D.
Well, yeah, that's true. But at the end of the game, it was exciting. We did it right. We were watching the other games, obviously, and we only caught the end of it. But the end was the exciting part. Baylor obviously ranked 5th in the nation, TCU 9th in the nation. This had big implications for the AP poll and the upcoming playoff. Yeah, everything. Yeah. Big 12, playoff selection, AP poll, everything. But Baylor ended up winning it 61-58. Came down to that game-winning field goal for 28 yards.
Yeah.
And we watched them. We didn't know if it was going to go in or not, really, to be honest with you, because of how the game was going back and forth. The momentum really shifted a number of times. At the end, obviously, Baylor took it over because they were down by 21 with 11 minutes left, and they came back and ended up winning the game, crazy enough. But a big part of that, obviously, was Bryce Petty, 510 yards passing. You can't argue with that. 6 touchdowns.
Yeah, that's big numbers. Big numbers.
But, I mean, do you think a team that gives up 58 points deserves to be in the top 4?
No, I don't. As potent as that offense is, they're just not. You gotta have a defense to be able to play with the big dogs even at a high level. And can you say that Baylor's defense is any better than Oregon? Maybe not, but we'll see.
Yeah, we will see. Now we'll kind of jump over back to the SEC, but what about that Ole Miss Texas A&M game? That was the most exciting game I've seen all year.
I mean, we were talking about it when we were watching it. So like when you're watching, or we were talking about when we were watching that game, is you just don't see that atmosphere like that at a game. It's just so awesome to see that in college football. And Ole Miss it's another loss for Texas A&M. I mean, just Ole Miss taking it to them. Mississippi State and Ole Miss just making the state of Mississippi look really good right now.
They were, and you're talking about 2 contradicting things too. Obviously, Ole Miss was at Texas A&M, which you kind of mentioned. They had attendance of 110,000 people there. I swear, I could hear crickets after the first 2 drives of that game.
Yeah, and
that's hard to shut down a Texas A&M team with the so-called 12th man and beat them in their house. And Texas A&M is not a bad team. You know that, as well as I know that.
Definitely.
But it's still exciting to see how good that team is. They can go in Texas A&M and beat Texas A&M at their home field. That just shows you how good Ole Miss was. And then you were talking about the excitement of football. That was Auburn, Mississippi State, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was crazy. The cowbells need to be banned.
They do after last week. I hope they do ban them because that got annoying. But still, that was an atmosphere to be at. And again, I mentioned before, at that Ole Miss Texas A&M game, there were 110,000 plus there.
Yeah.
At the Auburn, Mississippi State game, 62,945 fans there. Now, you tell me that stadium wasn't louder than Texas A&M.
That stadium was way louder than Texas A&M. It was just a crazy atmosphere. I mean, it was probably one of those moments that if you're at that game, you'd never forget it.
No, you never would. And this is why I love college football. You kind of mentioned this a little bit, too, compared to the NFL. But I'm not really, to be honest with you, I'm not really an Auburn fan. I'm not really a Mississippi State fan. I'm now a Mississippi State fan because that was quite exciting to watch the fans get into that game, and they definitely helped Mississippi State beat Auburn.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah, and along with Dak Prescott.
Yeah, Dak Prescott. He's amazing as always. 121 yards, rushing, 2 touchdowns. I don't know what his passing stats were, and that's kind of crazy that you talk about a quarterback's rushing stats, but still, he had a great game.
Yeah, definitely. So we had a shakeup in the polls. We had the number one spot get taken over by Mississippi State, who we were just talking about. Florida State is now number 2. And what I want to talk about a little bit is just kind of who they played. You talk about Mississippi State playing Texas A&M, Auburn, and LSU. Okay, and they played LSU really well, beat them down. They beat Texas A&M with their defense of all things, and they beat Auburn with the 12th man, obviously, and just good play by their quarterback, who's probably going to be the next Heisman winner. Then you flip the thing there, and you look at who Florida State's played. Now, they played Clemson, who, is ranked doing pretty well. They played Oklahoma State, who no longer is ranked anymore. But both of those games were really close. Clemson game 1 in the OT. And then they play a team like North Carolina State, beat them 56-41. But this is the same North Carolina State that Clemson played, who beat them 41-0. So there's so many inconsistencies with Florida State that I could see them dropping off the number 1. I don't think they deserve to be there. Mississippi State, if you just look at consistency, you look at Mississippi State and you look at Florida State, there's a no-brainer. There's a one-sided victor right there, and I think that the Mississippi State deserved that number 1 spot, especially being in the division they are in football, which is definitely the most powerful division in college football.
It's so hard with this issue, and this issue is going to be debated over and over for years to come with different teams probably, but they've been undefeated 22 games in a row now. They haven't lost a game. Obviously, you mentioned the crazy thing with NC State. Another fun fact about that was they were down 24-7 at NC State at one point in that game. Last year, they won 12 of the 14 games by 30 points or more. This year, not so much, as you kind of alluded to also. But they still have not got that L in the column. And until you prove that you don't deserve to be number 1, it really kind of, I won't say upsets me, but it really kind of confuses me how you drop the number 1 team out of that number 1 spot.
You could look at it that way, or you could look at it kind of about, that I guess if you look at the consistency, they've won, but there are inconsistencies as far as their score and their record and their stats. But then you can look at, like I said, Mississippi State in the division they're in, and how good it is, and how potent it is, and the people they've played. Now you can make an argument about Texas A&M. They're slipping a little bit. They beat them. LSU definitely is slipping quite a bit. But you can't knock that Auburn. That was an awesome Auburn team. I honestly think whoever would have won that game was going to go to the championship game in the SEC. I still think Mississippi State's going to. But if Auburn won that game, we'd just be literally switching this topic over to Auburn.
That's true. And if you think about it, Coach Fisher, he's Florida State's coach. He had a quote. It was 2 weeks ago, actually, and this is when they dropped out of the coaches poll. We're talking about the AP poll now, which is kind of used a little more than the coaches poll is today. But 2 weeks ago, when they dropped out of the coaches poll from number 1 to number 2, Fisher had this to say: "We can't control the polls. All we have to do is keep winning. If we keep winning and doing what we do, we'll be fine." And I agree with that statement completely. If they win out, there's no way you can't put them in the playoff selection committee.
No, there's no way. They're in the top 4,
no
matter what, if they win out. That's a given right now. Basically, I'll go over this in a little bit more in depth later, but any unbeaten team right now that goes undefeated is going to be in the top 4, except one team, and we'll get to that in a little bit.
I think I know who you're going to say.
Yeah. And we'll work this on to what you said, they haven't been beaten, and we're going to talk about the Notre Dame-Florida State game this weekend. This is, in my opinion, one of those show up or shut up type games. Both teams are under the spotlight for, underperforming, I guess what you could say, or, no one, Notre Dame's under the radar, Mississippi State's underperforming type deal. This is one of those games that if Florida State wants to win a national championship and be heard, they got to win this game, and they got to do it soundly. I think with some, they need to make a statement in this game. And that goes the same for Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame, if they want to actually be in the top 4 playoff pick contender, they have to win this game no matter what, obviously, but they have to do it they have to need to destroy FSU. Now, I think Notre Dame is definitely by far the underdog here. It's off the lines right now because no one knows whether Jameis Winston's going to play. Vegas took it off. They'll probably go back up tomorrow morning once they find out if he's playing or not, or if he still, hasn't been suspended, which it doesn't look like he will be.
And it's rough that we keep talking about these Heisman players who are getting suspended. If you're in the Heisman highlight, why are you getting suspended? You're gonna be known for centuries to come. All you have to do is not get suspended. And I say we kind of stay away from that from this episode. We kind of talked about with Gurley last week, but I did want to mention that it's kind of ridiculous how these Heisman hopefuls are getting themselves into trouble. It makes no sense to me, and maybe next week we can talk a little more about it.
Yeah, definitely. And just so you guys know what we're talking about just a little bit, I'll just break it down. There were 2,000 memorabilia autographed by Jameis Winston that was authenticated by the same company that Gurley did, used, and they haven't found out if he got paid for that, which is ridiculous in the first place, but he might have just done it for charity. You've seen him after games. He actually signs people's autograph. He'll walk down the sideline and sign people's autographs. So,
as a lot of the players do, yeah.
Yeah, so who knows?
Who knows? Guilty until proven innocent. That's college football.
That's exactly it. But coming into this game, Notre Dame has beat UNC, University of North Carolina, and Purdue by a combined of 23 points, and they got outgained by Michigan. Those aren't good things, good stats. That's why you're under the radar, Notre Dame.
Definitely not the Michigan
Purdue
one.
and University of North Carolina are terrible. If you're one of those top 4 teams, you should be beating them by more than combined 23 points, and you shouldn't let one of the worst offenses in college football outgain you. Even though you won the game by a lot, you shouldn't let it. By the way, Michigan only ran it for 34 yards. Their running back only ran for 34 yards that game. They still outgained them on offense, which is unbelievable. That once Notre Dame gets Everett Golson going here, then maybe they'll have a chance, but we'll see. Notre Dame ranks 73rd in pass rush. They're awful at getting to the quarterback. They can't get to him. If they can't get to Jameis Winston, good luck. You're going to need to stop Jameis Winston. You're also going to need to stop the guy he throws it to, Rashad Green. On passing downs, for instance, so if we do get a third down situation here, 30 attempts in passing down situations, Jameis Winston's thrown it. He's thrown it to Rashad Green 21 times. That's double the amount, or that's double of what the other top 3 receivers on Florida State have got combined. So you need to target Rashad Green, double team him the entire game. I don't care what you do, and you need to get the Jameis Winston. You need to make him pressured to throw it to another receiver.
Yeah, again, you know a lot more about this than I would. I really wanted to watch that Notre Dame game last week because I saw they were down early, but unfortunately, the Auburn, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, it was really hard to find time to do it. I haven't got to watch the replay yet, but I'd like to focus on Everett Golson and see how well he does. And I think if they win the game and Everett Golson has a good game, they're going to be in my playoff selection for the rest of the year. Because he really controls that team.
Yeah, he does really well on the perimeters. Mm-hmm. He's good at passing across the perimeters. Not very good over the middle. He rushes most of the time when he wants to go down the middle of the field. But we'll see how he does. I'm interested to see it too. I think it more or less comes down to that defense and how that defense is able to play against Florida State. But if they can match him touchdown for touchdown, then we'll see what happens from there.
Yeah. Do you see it being a shootout?
No, I don't.
I don't see it being a shootout.
I see it being a one-sided victory and Florida State being the winner.
Really? Mm-hmm. Oh, we'll disagree a little there then. I don't think Notre Dame's that great, but I think it'll be a good game. I'm excited to watch it either way.
Right. Another good game to watch this weekend. Most people might not think this is good. We're going to the Big Ten here. We're going to Iowa, Maryland.
Iowa's always good to watch.
Hey, we're both Hawkeye fans here, but this does have a significant impact on the Big Ten. Iowa's still undefeated. They have a fairly easy road coming up ahead of them. They play Illinois in a couple more weeks. This is Iowa's essentially championship run to lose here. They're undefeated in the Big Ten right now, along with Minnesota and Michigan State. The thing is, Minnesota is in the West Division as well. We'll play Minnesota here coming up in a couple weeks as well. But they're playing Maryland this weekend. Maryland, however, has a decent offense, I should say. Not the greatest. They were more run-based. They have issues with the quarterback. So here's the funny thing about the game is we might see 4 quarterbacks play this game. You have C.J. Brown and Caleb Rowe, both from Maryland. Caleb Rowe in the last 2 games have played the second half. One because C.J. Brown got injured, and the second because of performance. So we'll see kind of who starts there or who plays. No one said anything yet as far as that game, but Caleb Rowe is by far the better of the 2 quarterbacks. From when he's been in the game. He hasn't been in all the games, but from what we've seen, he is the better of the 2 quarterbacks. On the Iowa side, you have Jake Rudock and C.J. Beathard, a.k.a. Sunshine. Both will get playing time. Kurt Ferentz, the coach for Iowa, said just like they did last week. He doesn't think it's a negative thing for both of them to play. I see it a little bit differently. Some people might see it that way too. Once you get used to one quarterback or receiver patterns or things like that, it's usually good to stick with that quarterback. But Jake Rudock did come back in last week, looked a lot better than he did before C.J. Beathard took over the job. So maybe he just needed a wake-up call, and maybe he's back in action now and ready to go, because he did look a lot better under pressure, which under pressure beforehand he turned into his turtle shell.
His turtle shell. I like how you called it. I think you said that about the past 5 or 6 quarterbacks from Iowa. That's how you described their rushing ability. Turtle shells.
The Maryland D is ranked 13th in the Big Ten, so they're the bottom of the totem pole. They've allowed 212 on the ground per game and 239 in the air per game against mediocre competition. So I was a pro set, probably the truest pro set football team in college football. I read an article the other day, and they keyed in, out of any of the teams in college football, they keyed in Iowa, talking about how this team is essentially the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Chicago Bears or the Green Bay Packers. They do so well at passing from the pocket, mixing in play actions, doing lots of bootlegs when they need to, an astronomical amount of wide receiver screens, which usually you only see in the NFL. You don't see very many in college football these days. And you have just powerhouse running backs, a plethora of running backs to be able to use to either just beat up the middle and use your offensive line as a tool.
Well, that's why they run that pro style, is because their strength has always been their offensive line.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what a pro style will do for you.
I think they've always had decent running backs as well, too. Their last running back went to the pros and made a name for himself was Sean Green. He's done fairly well in the NFL. Set records is actually the first year in the NFL in the playoffs. But they have Mark Wiseman, who is that brute force. I'm going to just roll you over. Not very tall or even very big. He's just there, and he runs you over. He doesn't stop moving his feet. He's a fun running back to watch. You have Bullock, who's kind of the faster guy in the offense, and you have Kanziri, who is kind of the all-around back. He's the every down back, essentially, in their package. So it'll be a fun game to watch. Another stat here is Iowa's held opponents to 33% on third down, which is 28th in the nation. They've done really well in defense in the third down. The defense for Iowa is probably going to win this game, not the offense, much like it's got done the entire year. They're actually gotten better every single game on defense, and they're to a point now where they're really comfortable, especially in the secondary, which they really struggled on earlier in the season. And Maryland doesn't have a very over-the-top threat, so they don't really need to worry about that too much. But we'll see how that game goes. It's going to be big implications for Iowa or Maryland, who's 1-1. Both divisions are up for grabs in that one. Maryland obviously being in the East and Iowa being in the West. So another game to watch this coming weekend, I think, which is kind of like the same implications with the Big Ten we just talked about, would be the Pac-12 with Stanford, Arizona State. Stanford travels to Arizona State. And I don't know much about Arizona State. I haven't watched too many games. I know that they have a pretty potent offense, but Stanford has the best defense in college football right now. If you can hold Connor Halliday and the pass attack team, Washington State, to 292 yards in the air, you're doing something right.
Yeah.
And 292 yards sounds like a lot, but this is coming from a guy that's passed it or the Washington State, who's 490 yards per game average. So that's awesome. They actually held Washington State to a negative 26 yards and 11 carries. So they went negative on that mark.
Well, their defense is good, and I usually love Stanford. Unfortunately, they really made me mad last week because obviously I have Connor Halliday, Washington State's quarterback, and they shut him down like you said. But this week, they're also going to have another test. Berkovici, Arizona State's quarterback, obviously he came in to replace a hurt Kelly, and now he's stayed in since. He's going to give them another test, and if they shut him down, they're for real. Their defense is for real.
Yeah, Mark Bravetsky came in 2 games ago. He's been in for 2 games, almost over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns in just those 2 games. He's gone past Taylor Kelly's yards for 3 games by a lot already. So he's definitely going to be a threat for them. Again, Arizona State won off of a Hail Mary 38-34 against USC. It's a pretty good game to watch. Another person to watch in that game is Geraldine Strong, the wide receiver for Arizona State. Most receiving yards per game out of any other wide receiver in college football with 122. And in the last game against USC, 202 yards and 3 touchdowns, which is a lot for a receiver. Just had a spectacular game. Really good, strong, tall receiver that can go up and grab balls. So
it is quite impressive. I want to throw a guy to watch in that game, Barry Sanders.
Barry Sanders. Not the Barry Sanders.
No. Barry Sanders' son. He got a lot of carries last week against Washington State. He was about 3rd in the depth chart when the season started. I actually had him on my fantasy team, had to drop him because he wasn't getting many carries. But last week, he had a stellar game. Again, Washington State's defense, not great. But still, he got the majority of those carries, and he looked good. He looked real good.
Looks a lot like a Mark Wiseman kind of running back. He just kind of bowls people over, does a really good job of keeping the ball moving on the ground and forward. I liked it. It was interesting to watch him.
Yeah, I'd like to see how he does against Arizona State's defense and see if he can keep it up.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on, I want to talk about your vacation coming up this weekend.
My quote-unquote vacation.
Yeah.
It's going to be exciting, let me tell you. And just for our fans, they don't know, obviously, so I'll tell them. I'm going to watch my cousin, Alex Wall, plays outside linebacker for Upper Iowa. I'm going to travel over to Iowa, and I'm going to watch that game. I'm really excited about it, too, because he's having a great season. His team's having a great season.
Yeah, we've been watching every Saturday. We watch the games. They seem to only have night games, which is a little odd, but they have a fireworks show. Hey.
Well, that homecoming fireworks show, it must have lasted, an hour?
No, that was crazy.
And I'm going to be partying during all those fireworks because they're going to get a win. They're playing Winona State this weekend, who's a good team, one of the top teams, actually. Upper Iowa, if you didn't know, is in the Division II, which is separate from the FBS or the FCS. But in that specific Northern Sun Conference that they play in, Winona State perennial powerhouses. This year, Upper Iowa's 5-1 going into this game. They're looking real good. I'm real excited to watch them play. One reason especially is my cousin, Alex Wall. He's been having a great season. 46 solo tackles on the season. Can you believe that, Woj?
That's impressive.
You know what that is in Division II? That's 3rd in the nation on solo tackles. He's getting about 8 solo tackles a game.
That's crazy. Doesn't he have like a mohawk going or something?
Oh, I don't want to talk about his hair. I don't even know about his hair. It's some kind of girl haircut, but that's what they all do these days. Those tough guys. I don't know why they have that girl hair, but yeah, no, I'm real excited. I hope they beat Winona State, and we're gonna go down there, watch the game, do a little tailgating, Iowa style. Obviously, it will be in Iowa.
You know, the games because we've been watching the last couple of weeks are actually interesting to watch because, when I first think of like a Division II or Division I school, I just see one guy just running the ball the entire game.
Yeah.
But literally, they pass the ball probably 90% of the time. It looks like Washington State out there.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So, it's kind of fun seeing some of these long passes get completed and then touchdowns happen and then Wall comes back onto the field and just destroys somebody else. So it's fun to watch. Moving on to some fantasy, I want to talk about kind of just a couple interesting stats I found when I was revamping my bye week team this week. I think 80% of my team was on bye weeks this week. But AJ Derby, I picked him up on a whim. Brett Bielema we talked about him before too. He was a quarterback for the University of Iowa. He got drafted or got signed in as wanted to play quarterback. Most people wanted to move him to tight end. Lots of good schools were like, we'll take you and move you into a tight end. He was a quarterback at Iowa City High there. He played in the Army-Navy game, which is the kind of intro for the upcoming recruits to kind of show themselves where, some of the recruits sign in that game as well. He played quarterback in that game. So Iowa took him on as a quarterback. Kurt Ferentz has been known to kind of take some guys that might not be the best and try to make them great. Never usually happens, but he never got his chance. He played a couple games here and there, but never really got his chance. He saw Jake Rudock coming in, and he knew he wouldn't be able to be that quarterback senior year. So he transferred to Arkansas, where Brett Bielema is now. And Brett Bielema told him, he's like, hey, you're the closest thing to Dallas Clark I've coached. And Dallas Clark, if no one knows this, played for Iowa when Bielema was there. He wanted to be a quarterback as well, and they moved him into a tight end position. Brett Bielema was like, AJ Derby, you got to play tight end. So this year, he was going to be a tight end senior. I saw it on there. I picked him up, and so far, he is the number 2 in fantasy points per game.
For tight ends. That is quite impressive.
He's had large plays, too. He's had, I think, 4 plays now for over 54 yards. So he's an explosive tight end, too, which is kind of interesting and fun. But I just wanted to put that stat out there. He's number 2 at 8.5 fantasy points per game.
I wish my wide receivers would get 8.5 fantasy points per game. That'd be impressive for my team.
Dak Prescott as well. I know we talked about Connor Halliday and how impressive he's been all year, which, believe me, he's impressive. It's insane how he does on that field. He will definitely make it to the NFL someday. But Dak Prescott now is the leader in quarterbacks. Not in fantasy points, but in fantasy points per game. He is now almost 1 point exactly fantasy point per game over Connor Halliday at 39.17, where Connor Halliday is 38.14. So, just kind of some interesting stats there I just wanted to point out. I was looking through there and saw those. 39.17 points per game is... I wish I had that.
Yeah, that's real good. We'll see how good he is this weekend.
Yeah.
But another guy, I always like to tell the fans who I picked up that week. I like to say it after I picked him up so you guys can't go and snap him from me. But I picked up Georgia. Guess who I picked up from Georgia this week? Nick Chubb.
Nick Chubb, yeah.
Taking over for Gurley. Nobody picked him up.
He's actually did pretty well last week as well, too. So, I mean, that's a good pickup. Good fantasy play in there.
Yeah, and in your fantasy league, look and see. Maybe nobody's picked him up. I couldn't believe it when I actually got him in the waiver wire, and I was bottom of the waiver wire. No one had precedence over me, or a lot of people had precedence over me, and no one picked him up. I couldn't believe it when he was on my team come Wednesday morning.
Kind of trying to figure out who'd be crazy enough to drop Nick Chubb from their team the week he gets the start.
Well, he might have never been picked up because Gurley's so good.
Yeah,
why would you want their second string? But yeah, he's definitely a guy to look for in your league. So
yeah, another guy to look for this coming week is LSU quarterback Anthony Jennings. I know we've talked about the LSU quarterbacks way too much this year for a team that's not even that good. But I told you about Brandon Harrison picking him up last weekend. Now Anthony Jennings is getting the start, so-called the Mad Hatter said.
Yeah, well, I couldn't believe when you told me that because I was like, wow, I was about to pick that guy up, Woj.
Yeah.
I think it's a great call to pick him up.
I needed a quarterback, and I picked him up. I did some research, and then Mad Hatter definitely did say Anthony Jennings is getting the start and will play the game. He's not deciding to use 2 quarterbacks unless Anthony Jennings does something spectacularly wrong. So we'll see. We'll see how he does. They're playing Kentucky. Kentucky's kind of got a decent pass defense record. However, they haven't played very many people. A lot of the games they've shut out the other team. They did play Mississippi State, held that Prescott in the air to 105 yards, but they ran all over him that game. So,
yeah, well, I hope he does well for you. I need bottom feeders like you in the league to beat the top competition.
Just another interesting stat. So we have 6 teams unbeaten now, huh?
Six
in the top 25.
I'm not very good at counting, but I think you're right. Yeah, 6.
We got Marshall at 25, Notre Dame at 4, Notre Dame at 5, Baylor at 4, Ole Miss at 3, FSU at 2, and Mississippi State at 1. Marshall
in the top 25.
I'm hoping happens here, and I just hope this happens, is they go undefeated the rest of the year and win the Conference USA Championship.
That playoff selection committee is going to be tested.
Now, if their playoff selection committee, if there's 4 unbeaten teams, and then them, which there actually can't.
No, I don't think it's possible.
That's not possible because you have Notre Dame playing Florida State this weekend. You have Mississippi State playing Ole Miss the last weekend of the college football. So that actually can't happen. So this could be an undefeated team that might get snubbed. So we're going to have that same kind of controversy we always talk about with Boise State Those times that they got snubbed from the national championship game in the BCS system. This will be the same thing. You're fighting for that 4th spot. Yeah. So I just hope they win out this year and win their Conference USA championship, because I just want to see what happens. I want to see those playoff selection committee members sweat.
Yeah, I want to see them sweat too. I'm quite an advocate actually of this playoff selection committee, so that'd be great if this does happen, because then people can see. You put 12 teams in there. The 13th team people are going to be all up in arms about because they didn't make it in. Yeah. It doesn't matter. This is a perfect example.
Yeah. And Marshall does have a really good chance to run the table here. They really don't have to play many other people that are any better than the competition they've already played in their conference. And Conference USA is not all that good in particular anyways. They'll probably end up playing somebody like Louisiana Tech for the conference championship. But, I mean, they have, Florida International on their roster, on the schedule still. Southern Mississippi, Rice, UAB, and Western Kentucky. In what they've done so far in the season is impressive. 42-27, 48-7, 44-14, 48-17, 56-14, 49-24. They've been playing defense as well as a lot of offense. So, be interesting to see how they pick that and what happens. But minus Marshall, I don't think you're going to have them in your 4 pick this week, are you?
In my 4 pick?
Yeah.
I'll leave them out for this week. Maybe next week we'll put them in, or the week after. But no, for this week I'm going to have to leave them out. And the reason I'm leaving them out is because my picks are staying the same this week, Woj.
Yeah?
They're going to stay the exact same as they were last week. Notre Dame, Florida State, Ole Miss, Mississippi State. Hasn't changed. Obviously next week I'll have to take one out, which this keeps happening. I don't know why it keeps happening, but I keep taking one out because they lost to one of the other people on my playoff selection.
Yeah.
So I don't know if maybe I can see into the future, or maybe I should be a handicapper. I don't know, but yeah, no, I'm keeping them the same.
I'm gonna do 2 polls here. I'm gonna do a poll for who I think is the best teams right now and should be in the playoff, and then what might be in. Okay, what might be in at the end of the season. I'm gonna put Florida State in right now, Mississippi State, Baylor, and Ole Miss. Obviously, Baylor or Ole Miss and Mississippi State both have to play each other at the end of the season. So I'm going to knock out Ole Miss, and I'm going to put in Marshall. Marshall would be in what it could be at the end of the season. They would have to snub one of the Pac-12 or Big Ten champs to get into that. Right now, the Pac-12 or the Big Ten don't have an undefeated team. Their highest-ranked team is Michigan State, who is, I believe, 6th on the AP. They're right behind, 7th. They're behind Auburn, which is behind Notre Dame at 5. But I think their chances at getting in are even worse now that Oregon lost. And they lost to Oregon, if you can all remember, at the beginning of the year. So it's definitely going to be hard for the playoff selection committee, especially when you have 2 major conferences like the Big Ten and the Pac-12. They have a champion maybe with 1 loss. Do they get in over a Marshall? I don't know. I can't wait.
Oh, I can't wait either. And if you played out the scenario you said where Ole Miss has beaten Mississippi State, right? Last game of the year?
Or Mississippi State beats Ole Miss, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mississippi State beats Ole Miss. That would make sense. I'd agree. That game was played today. Mississippi State's going to win that game. But anyways, they get to the end of the year. It's going to be an epic game, by the way. Mississippi State beats Ole Miss. You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking, and I've had this since the beginning of the year. They're not in my playoffs right now, but I'm thinking Georgia's going to that SEC championship game. They're going to win that game, and they're in that 4. I think Georgia's a good team.
I think Mississippi State stays in the 4 then. Say it's Mississippi State, Georgia. Georgia beats Mississippi State. Man, that would be a tough scenario. You just look at if Mississippi State were to beat Ole Miss, though, going into that conference championship, that game would overwrite. If Ole Miss stays undefeated going into that game, that is. I think it wouldn't matter. I think then you put Georgia and Ole Miss or Mississippi State.
And that's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. Georgia and Mississippi State are in. Marshall's not.
And I would be fine. I would be fine with that. A double SEC team in the Final Four.
Now that there's 4, I'd be okay with it. Back when there was 2, you can't do that.
Yeah. Well, now that there's 4, they're the best conference.
They are. Although I would really like to see them play some more non-conference play. We haven't got much out of them.
I don't think your scenario is ever going to happen because Hunter Mason can't carry a game on his back.
Yeah.
So.
We argue about this every week. Let's not harp on it this week.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. My name is Woj.
I'm Wall.
And you've listened to the College Football Rundown. Thanks for tuning in.